Hey guys, Matt, IronTrap Garage, and today we're going to do one of our Hot Rodding 101 videos where we basically discuss some of the popular topics if you're looking to put together a nostalgic or traditional hot rod or custom. There are a lot of parts that make up the secret ingredients to give a car the look, that old time original style hot rod look or custom look. We're kind of discussing that in these videos, and we got a request recently, a handful of requests, but one of them was really good that we kind of jumped over, and that's headlights. So we're going to basically do a discussion today about specifically hot rod headlights. We may dive a little bit into some of the custom stuff, but we're more going to focus on hot rods, what type of headlights to run. There is a whole gamut of headlights. As you can see here, we have some of the examples that I have stashed away myself. We'll discuss a little bit about the era in which some of them are run and the different things like that, and why you might run some of those. So let's get started. All right, so let's start in the beginning. So with hot rodding, as always, a lot of the things are about making it go faster, look better, or just work better overall. It's all about performance and looks. So headlights are no different. A lot of people, when they were doing the hot rods in the early days, let's say like pre-war days, a lot of the cars, they were just trying to get headlights that maybe worked a little better than stock. So Model T headlights, for instance, were very poor, and even the earlier T lights were actually like gas lanterns, which we're not going to go that far back. But the idea was to get lights that maybe worked a little bit better, and of course, looking better was very important. So in the earlier cars, a lot of times you were seeing, a lot of hot rodding, guys and gals were taking parts from newer models because they might have looked better or worked better. And a lot of times, like anything, it's like the new cool thing. So when you were seeing 32 Fords come out, you were starting to see people using 32 headlights on just about everything. So Model Ts, Model As, all of them started to get 32 headlights. And if you step back, even like 3031 headlights, you would see people maybe using them on Model Ts and things like that. So that was kind of what seemed to be most popular in the early, like, so let's say in the 20s and early 30s. You were seeing more of just swapping around original type lights on the vehicles, and that was the most common thing, at least for me looking at photos. That seems to be, and researching it, seems to be the most common. Once you get more into the mid to late 30s, 40s, 50s, that's when everything kind of opened up, and we start looking at the photos. There's a ton of different headlights that you can run on your vehicle, and it just depends on the look that you're going for, the era of the car that you're trying to build a car to or replicate. A lot of that's going to change your reasoning for running them. So probably the most common factory headlights that you were seeing being used were the 32 headlights, especially the commercial headlights. They're a little more flat. They have a bigger lens on them than the Model A's, and they were just, because it was 32, I think, a lot of people were running them on their vehicles. I think modern nostalgic hot rodding, it was more popular to run the commercial lights. You see a lot more 32 commercial lights, I feel like, on cars that were built from like the 70s to current, that are nostalgic type cars. That seems to be more popular. You definitely saw them in old photos, but I feel like that's one of those like things that everybody wants to run the commercial lights, but isn't necessarily, might not have been as popular back then as it is in modern nostalgic hot rodding. So not that they look bad, just something to mention. So the 32 lights were really common. The 33 and 34 headlights, I feel like you didn't see as much being used. It's kind of like the 32 car and commercial were the ones that you saw a bit. And then the ones that I think were very popular because they were like a takeoff item, you'd almost get them at the dealer, get them at the junkyard, is like the 35 to 8-ish commercial lights or truck lights. Those lights are a little bit smaller, a little shorter in the width, and they just have a more compact look. So they looked a lot better on vehicles to have when you're taking the fenders off and your headlights are kind of just floating. It seems to be that those lights were pretty popular. I think they're a great looking light because they look factory, but they're just a little different. And you could still pick those lights up when you go to swap meets and stuff like that. You can pick them up quite often by buying just a bucket here, a bucket there, finding the lenses and all that stuff. You can put a set together. It's the same with some of the GM trucks and different trucks that were offered throughout the years that, you know, in the 30s through 40s. A lot of the bigger trucks, they still had standalone headlights, and that's what you, a lot of times on hot rods you see, because you just figure guys were going to the junkyard and they were just finding whatever they could find and taking the headlights and putting them on their hot rods. So the two brands that are probably the most common that you see, other than the like Ford commercial lights that we mentioned earlier, is the BLCs and the Guides. So the BLC and Guide, they had a couple different model numbers that were a variety of shapes and styles of those lights. But probably the most common one to see is the 682Cs here. So these are the ones that probably are, to this day, the most popular hot rod headlight. One of the things that was nice about these lights is that they had, a lot of them had a stud in the center here that made it easy for mounting on kind of a make your own universal mount or mount on your headlight bar. But the cool thing was they had marker lights on the top of them. Now they had, BLC had, I believe, their version as well, and the shape of the marker light might have been a little different, but those lights, I think one of the things that drew them to people were that they had those marker lights on the top. They look cooler. You got a marker light, you can convert them to a turn signal, and you could find them in a junkyard pretty easily or buy them right off of a shelf. Fast forward to today, those lights are still being produced, kind of reproduced, but you still see these at almost every single swap meet, and they are still going in the junkyard. You sometimes still find these lights. Now be careful with some of these lights. Some of the bigger trucks actually had them mounted out of the side, so the actual housing has a stud coming out of the side. Not as easy to use if you're trying to mount them on a headlight bar or on a hot rod. But any of those lights with the marker on the top of them is a really good one to use in modern times because you can actually add a turn signal or change them over so that the marker light is now a turn signal. So for instance, we have these lights here, which actually nicknamed like the gumball lights because the top marker looks like a little gumball, but they are BLC lights. You can see they're a little more shallow, so these lights are a little smaller depending on what you're putting them on. They have a little bit better of a look. The marker light's also a little bit smaller, but you can actually wire this up as your turn signal as well. So this is another version of the same, you know, brands. They came out with lights that all kind of look similar. So I would say that probably, like I said, the Guides are the most popular ones that you'll see. So when you start talking about lights that are even easier to find and probably more popular, that I saw in a lot of old photos, is the lights that basically have no marker light on it. They're usually a little bit smaller, and they came in a number of different brands. Dietz made them, Aero made them. There was even some of the Guide BLCs, they made lights like these that were very plain. And the nice thing about these lights is they were found on all sorts of stuff, but mainly they were found on like tractors and things like that. So again, old-time hot rodder could just go and steal them off of a tractor that's sitting in a field or something like that and put them on their car. What you would start to see over the years is some of the smaller cars, when T Roadsters were very, very popular before even T-Buckets, the official T-Bucket type style, you were seeing guys running these really small Dietz or Aero headlights on their vehicles. Dry Lakes era type cars, you saw a lot of the Aero style headlights, which are a little shallower, a little smaller, but they're not as small as some of the Dietz. And those lights were just, I think it was just because they were everywhere. You could probably get them at every single auto parts store. And they were just, overall, they were smaller and more streamlined. And that was something that somebody would run because you could just get it anywhere, get it at a junkyard. That's what the DeLorean Roadster has those on there. That's what that car had back in the day. It was probably built in the 40s, we think. And that's the style it had on it. Those lights, I think, if you're looking for something that's very simple, they're still very cheap. You can buy a set of those lights at a swap meet for probably $100 if you look around, sometimes cheaper. And they look just as cool as some of the other Guide lights that are become a lot more expensive just due to their popularity and the rarity of them. So when you get into headlights that are very cool, but also very rare and also expensive, you start looking into some of the Art Deco type headlights that you would see. Some of these lights are actually lights that were out in earlier times, but they've kind of continued to be popular through the years. A good example is like these lights here, the E&J headlights. These are like a torpedo type light that are actually quite earlier. I think they came out in the 30s maybe, from memory. And those lights just have always been cool. They've always been desirable. They've always been expensive. So a lot of the higher end show cars you would see, would have those lights on them in the early days, but you also saw those lights used on fancier cars, and some of the customs were using those types of lights. There's some other ones, like I think Woodson's, and some weird shaped lights that were more like fancy lights that were made for like accessory or aftermarket lights for Packards and some of the Cadillacs, LaSalle, some of that bigger cars. They would use lights like that, but then of course hot rodders and customizers would take those lights and put them on their cars. They're probably, some of those other ones are not nearly as popular, or you saw them as much on hot rods and old photos, but the E&Js are definitely, still to this day, some of the most sought after lights. They've been reproduced, but not a ton. So originals at a swap meet, if you're going to Hershey or some of the bigger swap meets, there's usually one set floating around, and they have a pretty big price tag on them. Very unusual to find a set for a good deal because they just look odd, and almost everyone on the planet knows that they're unusual and expensive. Now, some of the other lights that are more like I would call rare, but they're sleeper type lights, so you could still find at swap meets and things like that, is the electro lines. Those are cast aluminum housings that are shaped much like the 682Cs, but they have, because of the cast aluminum housing and the Art Deco lines in them, they are much, much more expensive and sought after. Those lights, I feel like you didn't see a ton of them on cars in old photos, but they're around, and nowadays they are very, very sought after. And I rarely ever see sets of them at swap meets. I would say you probably see E&Js more commonly. Those lights are also kind of fragile because they are cast housings. If they ever get damaged or broken or fall off of a car or just dropped, they shatter and they go into a million pieces. So that might be another reason that they are kind of hard to find. But you can find them at swap meets because without all the pieces on them, the trim ring, the light, all that stuff, sometimes people don't really know what they are, and you can find them pretty cheap. Some of the other ones are some of the lights that maybe, like for instance, these lights I have here. These are Auto Rocher, which are, I believe, French headlights, but they are just small little chrome headlights with cool lenses on them with the kind of Art Deco A on them. This is a good example. I see these lights at swap meets. People just have them on a table, and again, for $100 or $75 or $100 a quarter, you can get lights like this that are very unique, just as cool as any of these other ones here, but you didn't have to spend $2,000 or $1,000 for the lights. Another one is, these are some of probably one of my favorite headlights. I haven't found a car to put them on yet, but they've always been one of my favorite lights, and that's the Chicago Auto Lamp lights. So these lights are very shallow. They're much like the Arrows and some of the other ones, but they have this really cool mohawk on the top that is a Art Deco cast aluminum piece. Very, very neat. This, one of my favorite hot rods of all time, the Eddie Dye Roadster, runs a set of these lights. I always wondered what these lights were when I looked at them in photos, until I finally was able to see the car in person, and you could very faintly read the name on the top of them, and Chicago, I think it's Chicago Auto Lamp Company or Chicago Auto Lamp, Chicago Auto Lamp Manufacturing. So these lights are kind of like sleeper lights. I see these a lot of times at swap meets and singles or missing the top piece, and if you're patient, you can piece them together for pretty cheap. I've had this set sitting on the shelf for years trying to find the right car to put them on, but I think they are one of the more beautiful lights that aren't as common. You don't see them on all kinds of cars, so that's a good one to look out for. And the last thing I wanted to discuss, this is just some sampling of some of the popular headlights that were used throughout the years. And as always, you should, if you're trying to nail a period of time that you're building a car or a style of car, just look at a bunch of magazines that are from that time period. You'll very quickly get an idea of what the style was and what they were using for headlights and stands. But what I want to talk about specifically here at the end is the stands. So how you mount the headlights is almost as important as what the headlights are themselves. So some of the earlier cars, what you would see is if they were taking the fenders off, they would take the headlight bar that would have been mounted on the car, and they will basically cut it up, use the center bar and weld the mounts to the bottom of it, and then they'll heat and bend it to have the feet mount on the frame. Full fendered vehicles on the 30s cars, a lot of times they were dropping the headlight bars, so they would basically, just like a heated and dropped axle, they would basically heat the bar, put like a little Z in it, a little drop in it, and that would drop the headlights down lower and just look more sleek when you got a lower car with the dropped axle. The dropped headlight bar is also going to add to that same look. So those were kind of what you were seeing on some of the earlier cars. Then, I'm not sure the exact date, but maybe late 40s, early 50s, you started seeing the cast aluminum standalone mounts that basically mounted to the frame. So all kinds of companies made them. Offenhauser, Cal Custom, all different companies basically had their own version of it. There were smooth ones, there was finned ones. Some of them had holes drilled in the center that you can put the wiring up through it and hide it. A lot of them were basically made or machined after they were cast to fit a 32 Ford frame. I don't know why, but a lot of the sets that I see, they fit perfectly on a 32 Ford frame. If you're going to put them on some sort of other frame rails, they don't always fit perfectly, and you may have to do some machining or shimming to get them to fit. But what they do is they kind of give that bug eye look. They mount on the frame horns standalone, and they kind of come out at an angle and puts the headlights up kind of high. Now remember, a lot of these vehicles back then were street cars, and they drove them every day, and there was very strict laws with the height of your headlights. So a lot of stories I've heard from older friends of mine of getting pulled over for the headlights being too low. If the car was lowered substantially, then your headlights would go down. So sometimes they would have to raise them up with the mounts that they would make. So you'd see some kind of kooky looking cars in old photos where they took like multiple headlight bars, and the headlight stands are now very, very high. Well, that's to get past that law where they would actually take a tape measure and measure your headlights. But a lot of the show cars you see in the magazines, that wasn't necessarily a problem because they were show cars, or they were cars that were driven, periodically. I'm sure guys were just doing it anyways. Like nowadays, you just do it because it looks cool. But I know a lot of the height of the headlight stands is kind of proportional to what the law was at that time. So if you're looking for doing a car that's like that 50s style or even 60s style, those cast aluminum headlight stands are kind of like, they're like the no-brainer one that almost every car had something like that. Any type of the lights that you get, these early type lights, they usually have a ball and socket type setup here that sits right into those. That's how they're cast, and you tighten them down and then you can adjust it in the socket. So they pretty much fit 99% of the headlights that you're going to put on. If you start putting on some lights that are a little different, that are maybe like driving lights or something like that, or spotlights, they may have a little bit different mounting, and that might not be the case. But all these lights that we kind of went over that are the most popular ones that you see, they pretty much have that ball and sockets type setup that will fit those types of mounts. But that's kind of like the most common way that you saw them mounted. Again, there was lots of crazy things that were done that were custom, but the cast aluminum mounts, or taking an old headlight bar and chopping it up and turning it into your mounts, that's probably the two most common ways, and it's kind of tried and true. The nice thing with the headlight bar mount method is that the sky's the limit. Your imagination is what you can use to customize and make it different. So you see a lot of the old cars that they were taking multiple bars and heating and bending them, or solid rod stock, heating and bending it and making them all sort of custom. But if you're just trying to do a simple type setup, you can just take those bars, cut them like I said, and it looks great. Or you can take those aluminum ones and mount them, and it also looks great. So that is kind of my rundown on headlights, headlight bars, headlight mounting. Hopefully you found this helpful. Again, I just went over some of the most popular lights that we come across, you see in the old photos. If there's a light that maybe I missed in the video, or there's one that maybe you think is really interesting that is underrated, I'd love for you to drop a comment down below. As always with these Hot Rodding 101 videos, I'm just kind of giving you a jump off point. The comment section is always a great place where there's a lot of discussion of people that are giving their insight that probably have much more experience than even I do, or knowledge that I do, and they can drop it below, and we all get to learn through the comments. So definitely drop a comment if you have your favorite headlight, hot rod headlight down below, or drop one that maybe I missed. Thanks guys for following along, appreciate it. Catch you later.